We saw a very, very serious problem in that the president was not going to give up the tapes. He was determined not to.
What are you going to do if a president disobeys the order? Well, that was a terribly worrisome thing.
The confrontation could not have come at a worse time. The Arab states had just launched a massive attack on Israel. As the US and the Soviet Union mounted airlifts to their respective allies, superpower tensions escalated towards a nuclear crisis.
This unhappy concurrence of Nixon going nose to nose with his two great enemies in the world, Leonid Brezhnev and Archibald Cox, had the makings of grand tragedy in it.
When it came to facing down Russians, the president could act directly. But he couldn't fire Cox. He'd given away that power to the Attorney General. So Nixon had his chief of staff summon Richardson.
I walked into Haig's office on Monday morning, and he started updating me on what was going on in the Middle East. It was getting very tense.
It seemed the perfect way to win over this former defense secretary and expert on Middle East policy.
This went on for quite a while. And I finally said, Al, when do you want me to go? I'm ready to go home and pack my bags. I can leave any time. And then he said, well, Elliot, that's not really what no, I have another problem. You know, it was very clear that following Agnew's resignation that the president was then determined to get rid of Mr. Cox and the whole special prosecutor apparatus as it had been set up. And I said to Al, if you do that, you leave me no choice but to resign. And he said, well, there may be some other way of dealing with the problem.
The other way, which Haig persuaded Richardson to support, was a plan to satisfy the court and keep Cox's hands off the tapes. The White House would pick just one person to listen to the tapes. This ingenious ruse was dreamed up by one of Nixon's lawyers, Fred Brizard.
Fred Brizard came into my office with a gleam of hope in his eyes, which was not normally there, and said, Al, we have a solution that I think we may be able to cobble together, which would involve the turnover of the tapes to John Stennis of the Senate.
The senator, a 72-year-old Southern conservative, was a loyal Nixon supporter.
I went down for a very hurried little conference that didn't last over 15 minutes or 20 maybe. Monday afternoon of this week by Mr. Fred Brizard. And of course I know he was talking for the White House. He was talking for the president.
Stennis was to listen to the tapes and verify the accuracy of written summaries prepared by Nixon and his lawyers. The prosecutors would have to settle for these summaries, not the tapes.
Well, it was phony. It was phony as could be. Why pick Senator Stennis? First, he was a terrific senator for many years, but he was an old man, he couldn't hear, and he was going to listen to the tapes, and he was going to prepare a version. It was phony as it could be.
They had a picture of John Stennis in Time magazine with his hand to his ear and a caption which said, "Technical help needed." And I saw that, and I laughed so loudly that I almost fell on the floor, and as I looked up, I saw the pointy shoes of Richard Nixon looking down at me, and he did not see the humor in the situation.
I can only say that the fact that John Stennis had a problem with hearing does not mean that he could not, with the devices that are available to turn up the volume, have heard as well as anybody else.
Cox couldn't possibly agree to the plan. His list of objections focused on Stennis. He said that the task couldn't be entrusted to any one man. But the president wouldn't budge. He wasn't going to appeal to the Supreme Court, and he certainly wasn't going to turn over the tapes. Instead, on Friday morning, with the midnight deadline looming, he had Haig call Richardson back to the White House.
It was a strange meeting. I could only call it a rancid meeting.
The message to Richardson was that he was to ban Cox from issuing any more subpoenas to the president.
That, of course, put the situation in a very different light from what I had been willing to support. It was one thing to say you'll get an honest version of what is in the tapes from Stennis, and quite another to say to the prosecutor, you can't go after additional evidence of the same kind.
The White House was counting on Cox to resign in protest when he received the ban. If he did not, then the president's survival hung on Richardson. Would he sack Cox for defying the president?
The question of what I would do in that event did not arise.
It was a crucial misunderstanding, for Nixon's men thought they could rely on Richardson to do their bidding.
If Cox refused to abide by the transcripts and terminate requests for additional tapes, he would be fired.
There was agreement that Elliot Richardson was, in the language of that day and subsequent days, on board and was in agreement with the plan.
Haig reported to Nixon that Richardson might grumble, but they could count on him. The two men took a final stroll in the White House grounds before announcing, as if it were a concession, that the president would meet the court order by handing over tape summaries verified by Senator Stennis.
Late. Indeed, I think I'd gone home. I got a call from Elliot Richardson saying, here's what's happened.
What had happened was that the president had gone over Richardson's head and himself issued the order, banning Cox from further attempts to obtain tapes, notes, or memoranda of presidential conversations. Without delay, the prosecutor turned the tables on the president.
So at that point, I turned around and came back in town to the offices in Washington and called Jim Doyle, who was very close to me, was a public relations advisor and pressman and so forth.
This is Jim Doyle from Archibald Cox's office. I have a statement that I'm going to read as fast as you can take it. It's from Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox.
Newspaper deadlines were only 5 minutes away. I made a very short statement saying I intended to carry on with my job on the terms on which I'd accepted it.
In my judgment, the President is refusing to comply with the court decrees, period. I shall bring these points to the attention of the court and abide by its decision. Paragraph. Notes.
Cox scheduled a formal press conference for the next morning. The nation waited for the showdown between the president and the defiant prosecutor. Cox struck first, and the TV networks carried it live.
Good afternoon. This is the ballroom at the National Press Club in Washington, where Archibald Cox, the special Watergate prosecutor, is about to hold a press conference